I'm excited because in this Kingdom Conversation, I've got Geno Olison with us. And welcome, Geno. Geno is a senior pastor of South Suburban Vineyard Church in, is it
Flossmoor.
Florence?
Flossmoor.
Flossmoor, which is, would you guys be considered then a suburb of Chicago?
We are a South Suburban of Chicago. Yeah.
Great. And so we've been, I was just telling Geno, we've been here in Urbana. We moved from Minnesota to pastor this church in Central Ohio. One of the places that was on our radar as we were praying, like, Jesus, where do you want us to serve, was actually in North Chicago.
Okay.
There's a church, I forget the name of the church, wonderful group of people. And but what we realized, and we were getting along super well, wonderful conversations, but they were mostly Hispanic. It's a mostly Hispanic congregation, although they're not an Iglesia Divina or La Viña. They're mostly Hispanic. And in fact, one of their pastors that they sent out to be a missionary had to learn English for the country he was going to. And we realized, I don't know Spanish.
That might be a barrier. That might be a barrier.
Might have been a barrier. And not just with even language, but culture too, right? So so we're really we love where Jesus' land is. But I've appreciated Geno in the Vineyard movement. I was just telling him for some years he's been a strong voice in our movement. And I'm going to say this, Geno already knows this, but I'm going to embarrass my wife, Shannon. We were at a Midwest North regional leadership retreat conference thing up in Wisconsin. And I remember Geno walked by our table and Shannon looks over and she says, "That's Geno." And I'm like, "Oh, you know him?" And she's like, "Well, no, but I watch his videos." Like to Shannon, and she's going to be so embarrassed. So, Geno, I might need a place to sleep after
That's
this.
okay, man. Hey, David, I don't know if you know this, but my wife is named Shannon too. So we both.
Oh, really? There you go. But for my wife, Geno's like a celebrity pastor, like in her world. And I think that mostly is that because she's like the stuff that he has brought to our movement and what he focuses on as a pastor really resonates with her. And that's true for much of the Vineyard movement. So, Geno, thank you for spending time. Maybe you can share a little bit about your guys' story and a little bit about your church today, what God's doing.
Well, thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it. It's always an honor to be invited to have conversations like this with fellow Vineyard pastors. And so I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I was born in 81. So I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I'm a preacher's kid. So my parents, when they came to faith, got saved. And my earliest memories are at church, man. And so I grew up in a beautiful Black community. I say it's a Black community because it was an exclusively Black community. Our entire social network was exclusively African Americans, with very, very few exceptions. And so that means I went to Black schools, I went to Black churches, and my parents were pastors in a Black church. And so that's really all we knew. We didn't really grow up having meaningful interactions with people who were different from us racially and culturally. And so all that changed for me when I graduated from high school and I moved a couple hours south to go down to the University of Illinois in Urbana. You're in Urbana, Ohio, but I went to school in Urbana, Champaign-Urbana, the University of Illinois. And that's when my life changed in a really interesting way, because for the first time in my whole life, I was interacting with different kinds of people. And I found the culture shift to be shocking. And so to say it was a culture shock for me would probably be an understatement. But to make a long story short, for the first time in my whole life as a preacher's kid, I realized that I had a choice as to whether or not I would be a person of Christian faith. And honestly, I didn't know anything else. And so I linked up with InterVarsity because my sister had recently come to faith in InterVarsity at a different college. And so when I got hooked up with InterVarsity, there's an overwhelmingly white movement on this overwhelmingly white campus. And so I started attending small groups and stuff like that. And amid this sort of dizzying cultural experience that I'm having, the Lord gave me friends, people who were different. And so the first time in my whole life, David, I had white friends. And the Lord, which ended up being a real gift for me, because the Lord just opened my understanding of the world and gave me not just a tolerance of difference, but an appreciation for difference. And the Lord began to just rewire my thinking, give me different lenses to see the world. And so fast forward a couple of years, through those friendships at InterVarsity, the Lord took me deeper into this cultural experience by introducing me to the Vineyard. A friend of mine invited me to the Vineyard. And when I first walked in, it was super white church. I was maybe one or two, three Black people in the whole place. But I've been in the Vineyard ever since, man. That was back in, I think, 2001. So I've been in the Vineyard for a few decades now. And the Lord has used the Vineyard to really do a work in my heart and really put me on mission. I mean, I realized when I went down to school, the Lord was beginning to prepare me for the mission that we would be on even to this day. And that's a mission of really embracing and curating multicultural, multi-ethnic Christian spaces, particularly vineyard spaces, so that we might be, as our shirt says, you know, a love university, right? Where we learn to not just, we come not just to get a Christian education, but we also come to have that Christian education mingle with a social education that puts us on mission. So we learn to value the people that God values, and we learn to see value in places where we might have missed it before, which equips us for the mission. So spent about 9 years in the Vineyard, 9 years in Urbana in that Vineyard, in Vineyard. And then during that time, got bit by the church planting bug, met my wife, Shannon, who is white. And our cross-cultural relationship takes us deeper into this thing. And as we grow in the Vineyard, we feel called and to plant a multicultural, multi-ethnic Vineyard church. And so we gather a team from the Urbana Vineyard in June of 2009. We sell our house, quit our jobs, and we move ourselves and 11 other people here to the south suburbs of Chicago, really beautiful, diverse community. And we start what we call the South Suburban Vineyard Church. And I tell you what, we are in our 14th year right now. And that same crew that moved here with us 14 years ago is still rocking with us. And we've seen the church grow proportionate to the diversity that we started with. And when people ask me these days, how is it going? I have jokingly say that I'm living the dream, because when I stand to preach on Sundays, when I look out into the audience, I see with my eyes what I saw in the vision. And that is a sea of different looking people from different races, ethnicities, cultures, different socioeconomic groups, generational groups, that all have gathered under this South Suburban Vineyard umbrella to build for the kingdom here. And so I don't know if you want more details about the story, but that's the story in a nutshell.
That's really good. Thanks for sharing that, Geno. Yeah, I think that's super powerful. Yeah, I think, and I resonate with that, because Shannon and I, we came into the Vineyard in 1990. We were both 20 years old, just got saved. So that was very much, characterized as, like, we loved the contemporary worship. We loved the things of the Spirit in a way that wasn't hyped, or we loved those values that really drew us. Or we didn't know what the word vineyard meant when we first started. Like, we had no concept.
Neither did I.
It was really through relationship. Like, there was a guy that invited us, and we're like, well, he seemed pretty cool, so his church must be all right too. Like, so we went like that. But it was very, over the years, I've seen it since then become a richer movement. Mainly because of, like, what God's done and what He's shaping, what He continues to shape in our movement. And so it's I love that. Now, what I'm wondering, Geno, so when you first connected in the Vineyard, were there a few factors or a few values that would be identifiable, where you're like, what about it was different enough that really resonated with you? And maybe
that's a good question. I would say, man, when I look back on those, what stood out to me immediately was how accessible the leadership was. And I think that is an outworking of certain other core values. I appreciated that the Vineyard leaders seemed to fly pretty low to the ground, and I'm sure you understand what I mean when I say that. And on my first visit, when I looked across the room, I saw Happy Lehman, who was the senior pastor of this church. He's now handed the church over to his kids, but he's now the founding pastor. But I could tell that he was the senior pastor. It wasn't like I didn't see his name tag or anything. He just certain pastors just have a certain kind of swagger, But at the same time, when I would meet these guys, they were just regular guys, And if I wanted to get a meeting with him or the executive pastor, like I could get in that week, And so I have always an air of self-importance, especially in preachers, has always repelled me. I could spot that a mile away, and it wasn't something that I would be naturally drawn toward. But what I appreciated about this church when I walked in, again, you don't walk into a church as a Black man and it be all white and not be aware of the dramatic differences. I mean, you see immediately how many Black people are in the room. Like, you pick all that up. So the racial dynamics were at play. But what I was also drawn toward, though, was how well I was welcomed and how well loved I was from the very beginning. It was also true that although the music and just the culture of the church was very different than what I, one, prefer, two, was used to, then the Spirit met me there, like, powerfully, like right away. And to know that the same Spirit that used to arrest me in that Black church, like, there's not like a Black Holy Spirit and a white one. Like, the Holy Spirit is the Holy Spirit. And I would just go to that church, man, especially at that particular moment in my life where I was just trying not to lose myself as a Black man in this white space, trying to figure out who I was, being away from home. I was in this really tender place, and I would just show up to church on Sunday mornings, man, and just weep, like, during the worship. Like, that's where it was a combination of being in this really tender place, and the Spirit was like really ministering to me in this season of my life. That was also one of the things that I noticed. Somebody, I think a songwriter, has coined the term, a thin place. Like, I don't know if you ever heard the expression where the space between heaven and earth is thin, and it doesn't take much to receive a touch from the Spirit. I experienced Vineyard, especially in those early days, as a real thin place for me, where I knew I would have an encounter when I showed up on Sunday morning or in the small groups and stuff like that. Also, when I first got here, they were just starting the young adult ministry. And I don't know if you knew Jeff Heitkamp, but Jeff was the young adult pastor at the time. And so Jeff was just getting that off the ground, and he recruited me to be a part of that. And Jeff and Lake Q pastored me so well. They loved me so well. They discipled me and pulled out leadership. Like, I'm not in the Vineyard. I'm not even talking to you today if it weren't for Jeff and Lake Q, right? So those combination of things, though I was up against this huge cultural barriers and wondering if I could even find a home in the Vineyard, those things that I just mentioned are the things that made me come closer.
Yep. That's so good. Yeah, and I would agree with you about the Heitkamps. When we moved to Minnesota, they were wonderful. Yep. And they, at the time, were pastoring Mercy Vineyard up in Minneapolis. Yep. And I remember I got sick once and I was in the hospital, and I got out on a Saturday. And I remember while I was in the hospital, Jeff contacted me. He didn't have to do this, but he contacted me and was like, "Hey, I'd love to, like, come down and preach, instead of having to preach the day after you get out of the hospital. Like, I'd love to do that." And I said, "I'd love to have you come do that." Right, and we just we connected really well. Like, I loved who they were, and like super important people in both my and Shannon's life as well in our time in Minnesota.
And that's awesome. He's still a dear friend to this day.
Yeah, they're good folks. Now and I think he's pursuing, like, immigration law.
Yeah, he's in law right now. Yeah, he's in law right now.
Totally makes sense. Like, that's his heart.
He's always had a justice bent,
He has, yep. Now so what I'm hearing in some of your story, it reminds me of where in the Bible, the Apostle Paul talks about preferring one another over yourselves. And there's some humility in that. But I think more than that too, like when we fall in love with the kingdom, when we fall in love with the gospel, suddenly our preferences are less important. And there's nothing bad about having preferences, right? But like for you
they're
to
not
come
unimportant. They're not unimportant. They're just less important.
right, yeah, like other things become more life-giving, like so. And I think, and that's kind of like what underscores Paul's ministry is he would die to his preferences in order to see the gospel advance, right? So like you're reaching a Jewish, he writes to Timothy, you're reaching like a Jewish culture. Women like abide by some of the Jewish customs as to not turn away the people you're trying to preach and share the gospel with. Like that's sort of his, and he caught flack for that. But that's kind of his heartbeat. So what I'm hearing in your experience and coming in the vineyard is there were probably some things that weren't like your preference, that weren't preferential, but the things that like where God gripped you became like more than your preference. Maybe that's a better way to put it. Like it becomes more than our preference.
Yeah.
And then, yeah. And I think too, so as a church, one of the things, I don't know if I said in the video or maybe when you and I were chatting before, I think a lot of pastors and church leaders want to grow. Like nobody generally, they don't always like what it takes to grow or what comes with growth, understanding growth as a consequence of a church making a difference rather than the goal, but still growth says something, and people want to grow. We want people to come to know Jesus. We want people to be discipled. Like that should be the heartbeat for growth.
Sure.
But so we want that, but it's almost like we want 5 years from now to be a bigger version of who we already are. And that's so like not what we see in the Bible and not what we see in historically in when the church has made a huge difference in the world. It's when like transformation is more important than numerification. But numerification, like the numbers come, but it's not our goal. But rather, like I think what happens is we fall in love with the kingdom, and falling in love with the kingdom, part of what happens with that when you gain God's heart is you begin seeing kingdom expressions in ways you never did. Like in cultures that you wouldn't have connected with, all of a sudden you see the kingdom in it, like in a way that you never have. And I think that just comes with closeness to God and being open. So I think that's part of what Paul is saying about the preference thing. He's talking about building each other up and seeing the God. It's what I call in our church digging for the gold in people's life, and like seeing the God thing in people's life. So, and that's kind of what I hear in some of your story is, yeah, you maybe like culturally it would have like practically maybe made sense to kind of go to a church down the road or whatever, but there were these things that gripped you. And then what's happened over the years is like, I think, and I'm sure it wasn't easy for you, and I'm sure it's still probably, has its challenges, but to see change in a movement and comes with probably a certain amount of perseverance and intentionality, like being really intentional. So for any folks that are watching this, I think it's all of our heart that we would grow, not just in number, but like in people and in who we are, whether it be that we become more racially diverse, or whether maybe like in our church, probably one of the heartbeat is that we become a larger multi-generational community. It's like when you realize that you don't have to stay in your lane, whether it be race or age or whatever that is, like we can play in each other's lanes. It's like it's one big open freeway instead of like everybody's got their lane.
Right.
And I'm hearing that like in your story. Let me ask you this, and I don't, if you're not comfortable answering, or you don't have to name any specific thing or people, but I imagine in those earlier days for you there were probably some challenges, because coming into a church or a movement of churches, frankly, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
Like nobody would have said, "Oh, yes, we're a primarily white middle class." Like nobody would have said that, like, because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Until you begin to experience otherwise.
Sure.
So, what were some of those challenges early on, if that's something you can speak to?
That's a good question. I feel like Culture is so big in our life, right? And I think my experience with not all white people, but some white people don't think they have culture because whiteness is just at the center of American culture. And so, some people can view this is normal. Everything else is culture or this, that, and the other, because that's different from what the norm is. But like when you are at the center of your own world, particularly growing up in a Black community, like Black culture is everywhere. It's music. It's what made us laugh. And what's made us, it's humor. It's what makes us move, what makes us dance, what just who we are, right? And so when you get dropped into a different culture, you become aware, you become painfully aware that your cultural needs aren't being met, right? And so when I moved to Urbana, when I started going to InterVarsity, when I started going to the Vineyard, it was clear to me that these songs and how they're singing this music doesn't resonate with me. The preaching is collections of stories and how the scriptures are being contextualized. In many ways, they don't particularly resonate with me, right? What was common among the people, like what kind of TV shows they watched or what kind of music they listened to, all those things were fairly foreign to me because culturally they didn't resonate. And so what I was up against primarily was being an alien, so to speak, or being an outsider. And so I had to do quite a bit of learning and conforming. And I don't necessarily believe that people had to bend toward me in the same way. And so what it ends up doing is it ends up costing you a lot to be there because of how much emotional, social energy it takes to be in a place that where you're not getting your cultural needs met, where you are not the target audience for the programming that particular church or campus ministry is cooking up. It just costs a lot and it takes a lot of energy to be there. So those were the challenges, not to mention our collective ignorance surrounding other people's cultural realities, other people's politics and their worldview, the sort of things that get said or sort of things that are assumed, or even as people are trying to move towards you, the questions that they ask or the way they plate things, you begin to see why Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week. You begin to see why it's easy for us to stay with our own people because there's so much shared understanding and so much shared context, right? And so, but when a church like the Urbana Vineyard or when a movement like the Vineyard says, hey, we want to look like heaven, which is to say, hey, Geno, I know this is rough for you, but help us to like get better at this. Like, and then the Lord is saying at the same time, no, it's not really up to you whether or not you stay in the vineyard. I'm calling you there. All of a sudden, I don't have a choice in this matter. I have to kind of linger here and let the Lord do a work on me, but also help these people who aren't very good at caring for me come to not just care for me, but care for the other Black and brown folks who will come behind. And so, of course, there's loads of challenge in that. Now, we're just talking about this one local church trying to help this Black man feel at home and the other Black and brown people that will come. Now, it's a whole other ball of wax when you've been invited into a movement and you're doing work on a national level to help the movement minimally do no harm to Black and brown people, but become that place that eventually begins to look like that picture where we see in Revelation, where every tribe, tongue, and nation is not just, y'all can come in if y'all want to, but no, we're going to set a table for you so that it doesn't cost you so much to be in this space, that we're going to share the cost. We're going to share the discomfort. That's a whole other level of issue and challenges and everything else. That makes sense what I'm saying?
Yep, total sense. Yep. Yeah, it touches a lot of things.
It does.
Yeah, not just, not just like a Sunday morning experience. Like, let's grow our Sunday mornings. I think that when people think like, let's become a culturally diverse church, I think they're mainly thinking that our Sunday morning might look different.
That it would
But
look different. Sure.
yeah,
Sure.
and it would
But
look different, but Sunday morning is the coming together of those differences, living life together.
it is.
So
The part that's harder to hear, that I just think should be said more often than not, is that a lot of people, particularly white churches and white movements, when they say they want diversity, they typically mean they want to look differently, right? You talk about, you said earlier, when people want to grow, they want their church to be a bigger version of itself without really being transformed or changed. So when you take that faulty reality into the diversity conversation, people want their church to get bigger, and they want to grow numerically across racial and ethnic lines, but they aren't always inviting those people to bring their culture with them, or to give away power, such that the people who have a say in shaping that community, what it feels like, what it smells like, what it tastes like, what it sounds like, would be people who are of different tribes, tongues, and nations. We typically don't want that. That's where it starts to get messy. And so a church can be open to more people coming, but they might say, hey, we're not going to change anything for you, and don't you try to change this. But the kingdom diversity we're after is power is being given, somebody's decreasing so that somebody else might increase, and that the thing starts to look, feel, sound, and taste different because you're really mixing the paint, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so I'm just over white spaces inviting different looking people into the room.
Yeah.
We got to have a discussion about power. Like, what are we going to change? How are we going to take some things off the table so that there are different menu items on the table? Because people gather around. This is what I learned planning a multicultural church from the very ground up. People gather around tables that are set with them in mind. After the 2020 racial crisis, political crisis, all that sort of stuff, you see this mass exodus of people of color out of these so-called multi-ethnic churches, because what they realized when things got churned up, this isn't a real multi-ethnic church. This is like a church where you've allowed us to come in here.
Yeah.
When it hit the fan in 2020, there was mass exodus, and people started looking for churches with deep diversity, where churches were being led by different looking people. And you understand what I'm saying? And there was more of a justice bent, and it wasn't a white church with a multicultural mask on.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying?
I totally do. Yep. Yeah. It gets deeper. It gets personal with people.
Very personal.
It's like it gets into our life, our personal values, our family values.
It certainly does.
It's layered in the way that we think about life. And I think that's like, I think it's a wonderful thing. I think that the church could create spaces for dialogue, like safe spaces for people to have honest conversations. I hope we've gotten better at it. We're still some work to be done.
Some of us have.
Yeah, and have like this, because every person brings into their life experience, brings into their circumstances their life experience.
They do,
and our perception of what those things should look like is based on our own personal experience generally.
It is,
and some of it's good, some of it's not. Some of it God wants to bring healing to. Some of it God wants to bring wholeness to, and some of it is just really good. I can remember like early on when I recognized something in me, because I think that it is true when it comes to this kind of stuff, like we don't know what we don't know.
We don't.
But then God will expose to our own hearts certain things. And I remember I had a friend in Cleveland. We were good friends. We worked together for the same company. We got to lunch all the time. We'd go shoot pool all the time. And we just were really close. And he was actually, he pastored an African-American church, so a black church in Cleveland.
Okay.
And he was good guy. Like oh man, he could preach the Bible. Oh, he was a good Bible. He was a good Baptist preacher.
Okay.
And he was about my age, maybe a little younger. But I remember like one time we went out to dinner, our families, he and his wife, and I think they had a son at the time, and then me and my wife and maybe our kids, I'm not sure. But we went into this place in Ohio. It was called Pickle Bill's, like
Okay.
great seafood, crab legs, And I remember we walked into this place. It was packed, and I remember we were walking to our table, and he was in front of me, he and his wife, and then my wife and me. And I remember we passed another black couple coming out. And I remember my friend kind of doing like a gesture, like,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? Like they recognized each other.
Oh yeah, that's the thing.
And then they kept walking. They didn't stop. They didn't know each other. It was just this recognition. Now,
Mm-hmm.
in my like thinking and in my even brokenness as a person, I'm like, wow, what was that? Like, was that I'm going to be completely transparent. And in my brokenness, this was years ago,
Yeah,
but in
yeah.
my thinking, it's like, is he saying, hey, I'm with the white guy, but we're still okay? Like in my brokenness, what was being communicated? I didn't understand that, like
Do you
cultural
understand
stuff.
now?
I think I do. Yeah, it wasn't like, hey, I'm with this white guy, but I'm still, we're cool. It wasn't really that necessarily, I don't
Right.
think, because we actually talked about it, because we had a really good
I'm
open
curious. What
relationship.
did he say? I mean, what's your understanding of it now? I want to make sure you got it
Well,
right.
I don't know if he was just guarding words to not like, if he was what like, because we worked together, and
Uh,
afterwards I'm like, hey, I noticed, and maybe he was just like protecting my naivete or whatever, like, but he was like, oh no, I didn't know him. It was just like, hey man, there are things that we can connect with, just saying hi to another brother. That's kind of what he said.
that's
Like
exactly
it
what
had
it is.
nothing more. Like it wasn't about, it wasn't about, we think it's about us.
It had nothing to
It
do with
wasn't
you.
about me. And so, but we bring in that brokenness
Yeah.
that God probably wants to heal up and bring a truth to. But to have, like, I hope as a church we can grow in creating safe spaces that could talk about
Yeah.
what Paul says, like putting others above ourselves, learning both, maybe learning about different cultures within race or even age, or even where you live. I'm in rural central Ohio. It's a
Mm.
bit different. It's a different political climate than where I was at in Minnesota. It's a
Mm-hmm.
bit different than where I was at up near Cleveland. Like, so it's learning the little set of different values. And I hope that, like, I can grow in my understanding of the nature of God through the church that I'm pastoring and the people that we're doing in our community. And I hope that God can use me and my wife to like bring some change to our areas as well. So
Yeah. Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, but there's so many layers to this. I mean, we talk about get into this racial stuff, man.
Mm.
It's so many layers to it. And there's so much fragility on all sides. And there's so much stuff that we have to get over, and that's why it requires a certain candor, right? Certain frankness and forwardness, because the stakes are just super high. I mean, after 2020, actually before that, really, I mean, because we were already in the throes of a lot of race stuff, a lot of politics, mass
Yeah.
shooting, police shootings, all this sort of stuff. And so the pot just boiled over in 2020, and it was exacerbated by COVID and election year, all that sort of stuff. But right now, man, I'm just in this space. Like, I want to, if I only want to have meaningful conversations about this. I don't want to dance around the surface. I don't want to have the bubblegum versions of these conversations, because they don't go anywhere. And it just makes me tired and frustrated, and we don't actually gain any ground. And so at this particular moment in our vineyard history, in our country's history, I get a little annoyed when I hear a preacher say, well, I don't deal with politics. We don't talk about politics in our church. I go, what a convenience of privilege not to talk about politics. I mean, politics affects real people. Mostly it impacts the people who are on the bottom of the social order and the social classes. You understand what I'm saying? And so you mean to say that God doesn't have anything to say about our politics? You mean the Bible doesn't have anything meaningful to say about how we work out all these things that are broken about the world that we live in. And so we have, as you said earlier, off camera, we need to let the scriptures and the kingdom inform how we view the world and how we engage with politics, rather than having politics be our civic religion. But I feel like to have these types of conversations and to get anywhere within the realm of diversity and the multi-ethnic church, we got to have real conversations. We got to let people be the experts of their own pain. We can't try to manage somebody else's story and their worldview. We got to do more listening than speaking. And all of that is just hard for humans to do. It's hard for humans to do, right? And so that's why I appreciate this conversation and conversations like it, because you can actually come together and have a real conversation about real stuff and let the chips fall where they may, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, this has been, it is funny because this isn't one of the topics that like I even emailed you about, but it's these conversations sort of God guides and directs them, but this is rich.
Sure.
Like, this is golden for folks. Sure. Now I'm going to ask you, because we only have a few minutes left, I know. Okay. I'm going to ask you a question then, Geno, because this is probably what a pastor, maybe in a more rural part of the country, who, you know, I'm a white guy, so I have the white perspective of things, though I've been in some mixed churches before and have friendships that are more diverse maybe than others have had the opportunity for. But what about, like, so if a church is hearing this and you're like, well, that resonates. That sounds true. It sounds honest. It sounds genuine. Like, what would you say to a pastor or church leader who is in a situation where they're like, I'm hearing this, but this is not my current reality, and I feel like to pursue things relationally, like, am I going to go out looking for like a color that's not my own, like to just like let that be the basis of pursuing friendship? Like, it almost feels disingenuine, like, you know what I mean? Like there's a bit of a tension. What would you say to a pastor who is in rural America and would love to lead and begin allowing God into this area of their heart? Sure. And what are some good first steps?
That's a good question. There are good first steps. What I know is that every place, particularly rural America, is not going to ever be a bastion of racial diversity. And so we have at our disposal what we have at our disposal. But I feel, though, that the best and most meaningful on-ramp to seeing the world differently is people with a different perspective, right? My life is totally different. I'm a totally different person than I was in 1999 before I moved to Champaign-Urbana. What began was God opening my eyes, broadening my worldview, making my world much larger than it was and that I wanted it to be. And he used different kind of people to do that. And so I know that we are just naturally drawn toward people who look like us, who think like us. It's just easier to be around those folks. But we don't grow when we're in homogenous spaces. We're not challenged. We're not strengthened. Our skin isn't toughened, right? We don't learn how to interact with things that we disagree with and still walk together with people, right? And so I've learned, especially in the last 5-6 years ago, that the goal of what we're doing is not agreement. You know, I used to think maybe, although I would have never given words to it this way, I used to think, well, if we can just get together, we could agree. If I could just talk to you, I could convince you of the rightness of my position and worldview. These days, agreement is overrated. It's understanding, man, that's going to move the needle. Because I don't need to agree with you, David. I need to understand you. Because when I understand you, I just relate to you differently. I talk to you differently. I talk about you to others differently when I understand you, because you're the expert of your story, your pain, your worldview. You may not be right about all the things that you believe, But I'm more interested these days. How'd you come to believe that? How'd you, I mean, you got some really dicey politics, not you, I'm just speaking hypothetically.
Yeah.
How did you land there? And all of a sudden, 3-4 cups of coffee in, I go, I think that's a totally racist worldview, but I can see how you grew up, how you could come to that. And then our conversation, the next leg of our conversation goes to the next place. And so I just urge people to get out of their own bubbles. And even if you don't have a whole lot of racial diversity around you, if you look hard enough, you will find people who are different than you. And you got to give them permission to disagree with you without having to pay a price, right? You got to humbly listen, and you got to invite that kind of dialogue and that type of friendship, so that you might grow and see the world differently than I said. Look, that's been the last 20 years of my life. The Lord just constantly making me uncomfortable, constantly pushing me deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole, helping me to see what I don't see, not so that I might agree with everybody around me, but so that I can understand them, and so that I might welcome them into greater degrees of friendship and dialogue for my good and their good, but also for the greater glory of God. I hope that makes sense to you.
Total. Yep. That's there's a lot of wisdom there. Love it. Geno, I know that you've got limited time, so I don't want to keep you past you've got other obligations, but I thank you for this. This is gold, and this is a lot for folks to think about, pray about, process, really like examine your hearts. And I will say too, I'm going to put a link to South Suburban Church. If you want to learn more about Geno's church, what they're up to, there will be a link to their church's website below in the subject matter, and maybe to their YouTube channel if you want to catch some of their messages. I'd encourage you to do that. Now, and also you alluded to this too, Geno. I don't know if I mentioned this, but so you're not just a senior pastor of a church, but you've been on the Vineyard's national executive team.
I was
looking at these issues. So like you're seeing it from the perspective of having relationship across the board in the vineyard all over the country.
Yeah, so and if I could just say this, I would also say that currently I serve as the leader of the Black Pastors and Leaders Association for Vineyard USA, which seeks to create meaningful spaces for historically underrepresented groups within the vineyard to have not only community among themselves, but also to provide strategic direction to the national director and the national team. And so that's where I currently serve for Vineyard USA.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. And I look forward to all that Jesus is going to do in our movement, and how he's going to use you and other key voices to really continue to, what the Apostle Paul says, continue to shape and form us more and more into the image of Jesus.
Amen.
And
Amen.
Be good stuff. Thanks again, Geno. Thanks for taking time. Glad we were able to connect. And bless you guys. Hopefully we'll see you again.
Blessings.